The profound silence of the Pacific Northwest was a symphony unto itself, broken only by the whispers of ancient pines and the distant roar of a turbulent river. But recently, a new melody had begun to weave its way through the dense undergrowth, a low, guttural murmur that vibrated through the very earth. It wasn't the call of a cougar, nor the rustle of a bear. It was something deeper, older, a sound that spoke of primeval forests and secrets long held. Then came the tracks, impossibly large, etched into the soft, mossy soil. They appeared with an unsettling regularity, defying explanation, hinting at a presence that moved with immense, silent power. Each impression was a perfect, almost human-like footfall, yet gargantuan in scale, far too wide, too long, too heavy to belong to any creature known to modern science. These weren't mere anomalies. They were declarations, imprints of something vast and unknown, stepping deliberately through the American wilderness, challenging the very fabric of accepted reality. Deep within this verdant labyrinth lived John, a man who had intentionally withdrawn from the clamor of civilization. His cabin, a testament to his self-reliance, was a carefully constructed haven of hand-hewn logs and repurposed materials. Nestled so completely into the landscape that it seemed to have grown there organically. An ex-park ranger, John had once been a pillar of his community, a man who believed in order and the predictable rhythm of nature. But life, in its cruelest irony, had stripped him bare. The sudden, inexplicable loss of his family in a hiking accident, a tragedy that ripped away his future and shattered his soul, drove him to this isolated existence. The mountains, once his workplace, became his refuge, a vast, indifferent expanse where his grief could echo without judgment. He sought not just solace, but a primal connection to the earth, a return to basics that might somehow mend the fissures in his spirit. His distrust of authority, a seed planted long ago, had blossomed into a full-blown conviction. After the bureaucracy and insensitivity surrounding his personal tragedy, he found more truth in the silent language of the forest than in the empty platitudes of men. One crisp autumn morning, as the anointing mist lifted from the valley, John embarked on his usual trek to check his remote game cameras. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and pine needles, a familiar comfort. He was meticulous, almost ritualistic in his routine. But this day, something was different. As he rounded a bend in the overgrown trail, his eyes, trained by years of observation, immediately locked onto a fresh disturbance. There, pressed into a patch of newly fallen leaves and soft mud beside a trickling stream, were the footprints. They weren't bear tracks. He knew every claw mark, every toe pad of the local grizzlies. These were unmistakable, bipedal, incredibly wide across the ball, with an arch that suggested powerful upright locomotion. The stride between them indicated immense size and strength. John knelt, his breath catching in his throat. His ranger instincts, long dormant, flared to life. He measured the length with his hand, easily 17 inches. The width was equally astonishing, nearly 8 inches across the forefoot, and the depth. The incredible depth in the yielding mud suggested a creature of monstrous weight. A shiver, not of fear but of profound excitement, traced a path down his spine. For years, he had heard the hushed whispers, the tantalizing legends, dismissed them as folklore, the stuff of fevered imaginations. But here, undeniable, was the physical evidence. His scientific curiosity, dormant beneath the pall of grief, awakened with a jolt. This was no ordinary animal. This was something extraordinary, something that defied classification, something that challenged everything he thought he knew about the natural world. He felt a surge of adrenaline, a longing for meaning that had been absent since his loss. This wasn't a threat. It was a mystery, an intellectual puzzle of epic proportions, and he, John, alone in his wilderness sanctuary, was perfectly positioned to solve it. A thrill, exhilarating and terrifying, coursed through him. This was not just a curious anomaly. It was a call to a new purpose, a rekindling of a fire long extinguished. The solitude he cherished now seemed less about escape and more about preparation for this very moment. He packed away his camera data. The images of the colossal footprints burned into his memory, a new urgency propelling his steps back to the cabin. The forest, once a comfort, now hummed with an entirely new kind of energy, a promise of revelation. He felt it in his bones. His quiet life was about to become anything but. This profound encounter was only the beginning. The discovery of those colossal footprints ignited an unquenchable fire within John, transforming his quiet solitude into a relentless quest for understanding. He no longer simply lived in the wilderness. He hunted for its deepest secret. Methodically, he began his solitary investigation, each step guided by a growing sense of wonder that eclipsed any lingering fear. His initial awe, born from the sheer impossibility of the tracks, matured into a profound curiosity. He spent days meticulously surveying the perimeter of his cabin, extending his search deeper into the surrounding forest, always tracing the subtle, almost imperceptible signs of a powerful, elusive presence. John's weathered hands, accustomed to the delicate balance of nature, now worked with a new urgency. He retrieved his old trail cameras, long unused and gathering dust, and strategically placed them along game trails, near potential water sources, and in secluded clearings where the forest floor showed signs of recent disturbance. He wasn't after a fleeting glimpse. He sought patterns, habits, a rhythm to this unknown. He also started leaving offerings, small piles of his own foraging harvests, ripe berries, freshly picked mushrooms, even a few apples he kept for himself. It felt almost instinctual, a silent invitation, a gesture of peace to whatever mighty creature roamed these ancient woods. His patience, honed by years of living off-grid, was finally rewarded. The cameras, after weeks of capturing nothing but deer, bears, and the occasional cougar, began to tell a different story. Blurry images at first, then clearer, though still indistinct, showed a massive, dark form, moving with an unnatural fluidity through the dense undergrowth. The sheer scale of it was breathtaking, even in grainy stills. It moved with a silent power that belied its immense size, an almost ethereal presence. John spent hours poring over the footage, frame by frame, noticing details, the careful way it navigated fallen logs, the apparent avoidance of direct confrontation with other animals, the almost human-like intelligence in its movements. This wasn't just a large primate. It was something more, something profoundly aware. But as John delved deeper into this captivating mystery, a chill began to creep down his spine, unrelated to the crisp mountain air. Subtle anomalies started appearing around his remote haven. He noticed tire tracks on the rarely used logging road leading to his property, tracks that were too clean, too precise, not belonging to any local vehicles. Unmarked sedans and dark SUVs, out of place in this rugged terrain, were occasionally spotted by rare visitors or distant neighbors, idling for too long before vanishing. Then came the drones. Small, silent, and unsettlingly persistent, they began to patrol the skies above the forest, distant humming sounds sometimes piercing the natural quiet. They were too sophisticated for amateur enthusiasts, too coordinated for casual observation. John felt a creeping sensation, an undeniable feeling of being watched, an unwelcome intrusion into his sanctuary. He tried to ignore it, to dismiss it as paranoia born from his solitary life and the burgeoning mystery before him. But the surveillance intensified, becoming bolder, more overt. The drones flew lower, their mechanical eyes seemingly fixed on his cabin. He knew the feeling of being hunted, of being observed, and this was different. This wasn't a curious animal. This was a deliberate, calculating human presence. It felt like the outside world, the very world he had sought to escape, was now pressing in, bringing with it an insidious sense of unease. Despite the growing external pressure, John forced himself to focus on the creature. He observed its habits with an almost scientific devotion, spending countless hours hidden in observation blinds, patiently waiting. He noted its foraging routes, its preferred resting spots, the patterns of its nocturnal movements. He learned that it communicated through a series of deep vocalizations, sometimes mournful, sometimes inquisitive, but always resonant with a profound intelligence. It wasn't simply an animal reacting to its environment. It was interacting with it, making choices, exhibiting a form of reasoning. He started thinking of it not as an it, but as a he, a singular, magnificent being. He needed a name, something that encapsulated its power and its connection to the wild heart of the land. He settled on Kodiak, a name that evoked strength, wilderness, and a certain ancient wisdom. Kodiak, he realized, was not a threat. Kodiak was intelligent, sentient, and profoundly vulnerable in a world that would inevitably misunderstand and fear him. The thought of what those unmarked vehicles and hovering drones represented, what they might do if they discovered Kodiak, filled John with a deep, protective dread. His mission, initially one of scientific curiosity, was rapidly evolving into one of guardianship. The outside world could watch all it wanted. John's loyalty now lay with the silent giant of the forest. The subtle shifts in Kodiak's demeanor became undeniably clearer with each passing day, marking a palpable escalation in their interactions. What began as fleeting glimpses and cautious retreats transformed into deliberate approaches, guided by an intense, almost sorrowful curiosity in the creature's deep, discerning eyes. John watched, fascinated, as Kodiak mimicked his simple hand gestures, slowly, awkwardly at first, then with a growing understanding that transcended mere imitation. A raised hand, palm open, was met with a similar, massive paw, held aloft in a gesture of tentative peace. Soft grunts and low hums emanated from the creature, sounds that John, through patient observation, began to associate with different emotional states. A rumble of contentment, a sharp huff of mild frustration, a sigh-like exhale of what seemed like profound weariness. John left carefully chosen offerings of wild berries and nuts, strategically placed near the edge of the clearing. Kodiak, rather than merely consuming them, would often bring back its own gifts. A meticulously arranged pile of smooth, river-worn stones, a cluster of oddly shaped fungi, or a single, iridescent blue feather, placed with an almost ceremonial precision. These exchanges, wordless yet profoundly communicative, forged an unexpected bond. John began to see Kodiak not as a wild animal, nor merely an intelligent one, but as an ancient being, possessing a rich inner life, burdened perhaps by a solitude even deeper than his own. He realized, with a jolt of profound certainty, that Kodiak was not a threat. It was vulnerable. It was a sentient being existing on the knife edge of human ignorance and potential exploitation, a relic of a forgotten world that had somehow survived into this one. This creature, he knew, needed his protection more than anything. Yet, as his connection with Kodiak deepened, the insidious, unseen threat from the outside world drew ever closer, tightening its grip. The subtle signs of surveillance that had once been dismissible became undeniably overt. His satellite phone, a lifeline to a world he increasingly shunned, began to exhibit erratic behavior. Calls dropped mid-sentence, signals vanished in clear skies, and static often drowned out incoming voices, even in places where reception had always been pristine. He'd meticulously checked the antennae, the wiring, the battery, but found nothing amiss, leading him to the chilling conclusion that the interference was external, deliberate. Then came the searches. Small, almost imperceptible disturbances within his cabin spoke volumes to John's trained eye. A book subtly moved from its usual spot on the shelf, its spine now facing outwards instead of inwards. The latch on his rifle case, always meticulously closed, felt just a fraction looser. A faint, almost imperceptible scent, like ozone mixed with something metallic, lingered near his old, dusty maps, which he kept folded beneath a loose floorboard. These weren't the clumsy intrusions of an amateur. They were the work of professionals, careful and precise, intended to be undetected, yet leaving just enough of a trace for someone like John to notice. They weren't looking for valuables. They were looking for information about him, about his activities. One evening, returning from a deep foray into the forest, where he'd observed Kodiak teaching its young how to forage, John found a small metallic disc, no larger than a coin, affixed to the underside of his kitchen table. Its sleek black surface was cold to the touch, devoid of any markings. He immediately recognized it as an advanced listening device, a silent, unblinking ear in his sanctuary. A cold dread seeped into him, chilling him to the bone. They weren't just watching him. They were listening to his every breath, his every thought, his every private word, even those he only whispered to himself. His solitude, the very essence of his chosen life, had been utterly violated. John's dilemma became a crushing weight, pressing down on him from all sides. His connection to Kodiak, once a source of wonder and profound peace, was now inextricably linked to an escalating danger. He felt an intense, almost primal possessiveness towards the creature, a fierce instinct to shield it from the predatory curiosity of the outside world. He understood implicitly that if Kodiak's existence were to be revealed, it wouldn't be met with scientific awe or ethical consideration. It would be met with fear, with exploitation, with the insatiable human desire to categorize, control, and ultimately destroy what it doesn't understand. Kodiak, and perhaps others like it, would become specimens, exhibits, or worse, targets. His own vulnerability became acutely apparent. He was an old man, living alone in the wilderness, his only weapon his knowledge of the land and a few aging firearms. Against the might of a shadowy government agency, he was utterly helpless. They could make him disappear, frame him, or simply take what they wanted, and no one would ever know. The ethical implications of his accidental discovery gnawed at him relentlessly. Was it his right to conceal such a monumental biological finding from the world? Or was it his duty to protect a species that, by all accounts, had managed to evade human detection for millennia, simply because revealing it would lead to its inevitable demise? The forest, once his haven, now felt like a cage. Every rustle of leaves, every distant bird call, every shadow that stretched across his cabin floor felt pregnant with the unseen eyes and ears of his watchers. He knew they were waiting, watching for him to make a move, to reveal the secret they instinctively knew he held. He had accidentally stumbled upon something profound, something world-altering, and now he and Kodiak were bound together, two solitary beings caught in the crosshairs of an unfolding conflict. The path forward was fraught with peril, but John knew, deep within his weathered heart, that he could not abandon Kodiak. He would protect this ancient secret, even if it meant sacrificing everything he had left. The game had begun, and John, the reclusive ex-ranger, found himself on the precipice of a battle far greater than any he had ever imagined. The bond between John and Kodiak deepened with each passing day, transcending the boundaries of species, forging an unspoken pact of mutual respect and understanding. John spent hours observing from a discreet distance, watching Kodiak not just as a creature of myth, but as an intelligent being navigating its complex world. He witnessed tender moments. The large hands of Kodiak gently guiding a smaller, younger Sasquatch through a thicket, demonstrating foraging techniques with patient precision. He saw playful interactions, vocalizations that sounded like low, rumbling laughter, echoing through the ancient trees, and quick, reassuring touches among what he now understood was Kodiak's family unit. There were at least 3 others, a mate and 2 young ones, moving with a fluid, almost ethereal grace through the dense undergrowth, their movements so synchronized they seemed to melt into the shadows. This realization that Kodiak was not some solitary anomaly, but part of a familial group, living, learning, and thriving, solidified John's resolve. This wasn't merely a biological discovery. It was the revelation of an entire, hidden civilization, existing in parallel to humanity, utterly unaware of the dangers their existence posed to them if exposed. The weight of their survival now rested heavily on John's shoulders. He was their accidental guardian, their unwitting protector, against a world that would inevitably seek to exploit or destroy them. He felt a profound sense of purpose, a clarity he hadn't experienced since his own family's tragic loss. Protecting them became his new reason for being. The pervasive sense of being watched, however, never fully receded. One crisp autumn afternoon, as John was meticulously chopping firewood, a sleek, dark SUV, incongruously clean for the rugged forest road, pulled up to his cabin. A man in an immaculately tailored suit, despite the remote setting, stepped out. He was tall, with sharp, intelligent eyes that missed nothing, and a demeanor that exuded an unsettling blend of politeness and authority. "Mr. Harrison?" the man inquired, his voice smooth and devoid of any regional accent. "Agent Miller, FBI. Mind if I have a word?" John, ever the seasoned woodsman, remained outwardly calm, though a tremor of apprehension ran through him. He leaned against his axe, wiping a calloused hand across his brow. "Depends on the word, Agent," he replied, his voice gruff, betraying nothing. Miller offered a thin smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Just some routine checks, environmental impact assessments. We've had some unusual reports from nearby hikers, claims of extensive game trail disruption, large animal tracks, things of that nature." Miller gestured vaguely towards the surrounding forest. "Given your history as a ranger, your expertise in the local ecosystem, we thought you might be able to shed some light." John's mind raced. He knew this was a flimsy pretext, a thin veil over their true intentions. He met Miller's gaze, his own eyes steely and unyielding. "This forest is full of wild things, Agent. Bears, elk, cougars. Tracks vary. As for environmental impact, it's a wilderness. Nature finds its own way here." He shrugged dismissively, hoping to convey an air of disinterest. Miller's gaze lingered on John's face for a moment too long, searching, probing, assessing. "Indeed," he conceded, his voice still smooth. "But these reports mentioned unusual size, bipedal locomotion. Anything of that sort pique your interest, Mr. Harrison?" John feigned a puzzled expression. "Bipedal? You mean like deer walking on two legs?" "Agent, I've seen my share of strange things out here, but nothing quite like that. Perhaps someone had too much Mountain Dew." He let out a short, mirthless chuckle, carefully calibrating his response to sound dismissive, bordering on slightly amused by the absurdity. He could feel Miller's scrutiny intensify, like a physical weight. The agent's questions, though framed innocently, were surgical, designed to extract information without overtly stating their true objective. John understood the game perfectly. Any deviation, any hint of recognition in his eyes, any slight hesitation, and he would give them the opening they desperately sought. "We also understand you've been quite active with your trail cameras lately," Miller continued, his tone conversational, but with an underlying edge. "Any interesting wildlife observations to report? Perhaps a new species, something previously undocumented?" The specificity of the question, the casual mention of his trail cameras, confirmed John's worst fears. They knew. They had been watching him closely, perhaps even accessing his electronic data, though he had taken every precaution to secure it offline. John inwardly coiled, but maintained his placid exterior. Just the usual. Deer, the occasional bear. Nothing you wouldn't expect in these parts. He paused, then added, with a touch of curated annoyance, "You know, Agent, a man lives out here for peace and quiet. All this talk of unusual reports and environmental impact sounds a lot like city folk stirring up trouble where there is none." He hoped to project an image of a simple recluse, annoyed by bureaucratic intrusion, rather than a man guarding an impossible secret. Miller's smile tightened, a fraction of his composure slipping. "Of course, Mr. Harrison, we appreciate your cooperation." But the words were hollow, a performative politeness. His eyes scanned John's property, taking in the cabin, the neatly stacked firewood, the subtle signs of a life lived in harmony with the wild. John could practically hear the gears turning in Miller's mind, cataloging every detail, every potential clue. He knew Miller wasn't buying his act, not entirely. The agent was too sharp, too professional, but John also knew he hadn't given him enough to justify a more aggressive approach. Not yet. As Miller returned to his SUV and drove away, the gravel crunching under tires disappearing into the forest sounds, John leaned heavily against his axe. The brief encounter had been a chess match, a delicate dance of deception and probing. He had resisted the temptation to reveal anything, to hint at the extraordinary existence he now championed, the profound implications of Kodiak's existence, the potential for exploitation, fear, and irreversible harm far outweighed any personal desire for scientific validation. He knew, with an unwavering certainty, that the government, with its broad mandates and inherent distrust of the unknown, would not approach a discovery like Kodiak with gentle hands or ethical consideration. They would see it as a resource to be controlled, a threat to be managed, or a specimen to be contained. John's resolve hardened. He would protect Kodiak and its family with every fiber of his being, even if it meant becoming an adversary to the very government he once served. The game was no longer theoretical. It was personal, and the stakes were nothing less than the survival of an ancient, unknown species. The metallic disc, cold and intrusive beneath his worn fingertips, solidified every creeping suspicion John had harbored. It wasn't just a sense of being watched, it was a confirmed invasion. He peeled the device off, its adhesive surprisingly strong, and crushed it in his calloused hand, a futile gesture against an omnipresent foe. The next morning, as the first rays of dawn painted the ancient pines in hues of gold, a black, unmarked SUV with tinted windows pulled silently into his clearing. It wasn't a surprise, not after the discovery of the bug. The waiting was over. Agent Miller emerged, no longer clad in the polite, understated attire of a concerned environmentalist, but in a crisp, dark suit that seemed utterly out of place amidst the wilderness. His demeanor had shifted, too, the subtle probing replaced by an authoritative directness that left no room for pretense. He walked to John's porch, stopping just short of the steps, his gaze unwavering, cutting through John's stoic facade. "Mr. Davis," Miller began, his voice level, devoid of any previous warmth, "let's dispense with the pleasantries. My agency has been monitoring this area for some time. We're aware of anomalous biological signatures emanating from this sector of the forest, and we're aware of your unusual interactions." John remained silent, his eyes fixed on the distant tree line, a subtle defiance in his posture. He knew what was coming, had felt its inevitability like the shifting of tectonic plates. Miller continued, stepping closer, his voice dropping slightly, becoming more insidious. "We're talking about something unprecedented, Mr. Davis. Something that, if its existence were to become public knowledge, could trigger widespread panic, destabilize societal structures, and potentially, well, rewrite everything we thought we knew about the natural world. This isn't just an interesting biological discovery, it's a national security issue." The phrase hung in the crisp morning air, national security issue. John finally turned, meeting Miller's gaze, a flicker of cold anger in his eyes. A national security issue? So, a species that has existed peacefully, hidden from your civilization for millennia, minding its own business, suddenly becomes a threat because you finally stumbled upon it. His voice was low, edged with contempt. "You mean it's a threat to your carefully constructed reality, where humanity is at the top of the food chain, the sole intelligent species on this planet?" Miller's expression hardened. "We don't know what it is, Mr. Davis. Its intelligence, its capabilities, its intentions, all unknown. We cannot risk an unknown entity of this magnitude operating undetected within our borders. The potential for disruption, for misunderstanding, for exploitation by hostile foreign powers. It's a risk we cannot take." He paused, letting the implications sink in. "We need to secure it, study it, understand it, for the safety of the nation." John scoffed. "Safety of the nation? Or for the purpose of controlling what you don't understand, classifying it, and then inevitably exploiting it? I've seen your kind before, Agent. You don't protect, you contain. You don't study, you dissect. You say national security. I hear fear of the unknown and desire for absolute control." He gestured broadly at the ancient forest surrounding them. "This creature, these creatures, are a part of this world, not a threat to it. They have a right to exist, unmolested, just like any other species. With all due respect, Mr. Davis," Miller retorted, stepping fully onto the porch, his voice losing its last vestiges of politeness. "Your sentimental attachment to what is, at best, an unclassified animal, and at worst, a dangerous anomaly, is clouding your judgment. This is beyond your purview. This is a matter for the highest levels of government and scientific minds." "Scientific minds?" John's laugh was bitter. "The same scientific minds that would cage it, poke it, prod it, and ultimately destroy it in their misguided quest for knowledge? I've spent months observing Kodiak. He is intelligent, compassionate, and has a family. He understands respect, and he holds no malice. He's more human than many humans I've met, including, I suspect, yourself, Agent. Miller's jaw tightened. Your cooperation is not optional, Mr. Davis. We know you've been providing food, shelter, and information to this entity. That constitutes aiding and abetting. We are prepared to offer you a path to avoid charges, to become an invaluable asset in our research. But we need your full cooperation. Now. John shook his head, a resolute stubbornness settling deep in his features. I won't betray them. I won't betray Kodiak. He trusted me, and I will honor that trust. What you're asking is morally reprehensible. The air crackled with tension. Miller studied John for a long moment, a cold calculation in his eyes. Then, he pulled out a small, sleek device, pressing a button. A faint, almost imperceptible hum filled the air. Your cabin is now fully equipped with our advanced monitoring systems, Mr. Davis. Every conversation, every movement, every electronic signal, we'll know, and I assure you, your communication with anyone outside this immediate area has been severed. You are isolated. He took another step closer, his voice dropping to a low, menacing tone. Consider this a final warning. Any attempt to obstruct our operation, to alert anyone, or to aid the entity's evasion will be met with severe consequences. Consequences, Mr. Davis, that will make your current predicament seem like a walk in the park. This isn't a request, it's an order. John felt the weight of their power, the oppressive force of a system designed to crush any dissent. He was trapped. The forest, once his sanctuary, was now a cage, and he, its unwitting prisoner, stood at the precipice of an impossible choice. Protect Kodiak and face the full wrath of the government, or surrender and condemn a species to a fate he knew would be brutal. The walls were closing in, and the fight he'd unknowingly stumbled into had just begun in earnest. He looked out at the ancient trees, wondering if Kodiak, watching from the shadows, understood the gravity of the silent war that had just been declared. The intrusive listening device, a small, cold circle of advanced technology, sealed John's bleak realization. Convention was no longer an option. He couldn't outmaneuver the FBI with logic or appeals to ethics. Their resources were limitless, their patience a calculated veneer. His only path was evasion, a desperate, dangerous gamble against an unseen enemy. He had to make Kodiak and its family vanish, not just from human sight, but from the relentless grip of infrared, satellite imagery, and every biometric scanner known to man. John began to devise a plan, his mind racing through decades of wilderness survival, tracking, and counter-tracking knowledge. He thought of ancient pathways, forgotten caves, and the sheer, brutal vastness of the untouched high country. His strategy would rely on deception, creating intricate false trails and exploiting the inherent limitations of technology against the boundless intelligence of nature. He would use the terrain as his ally, the dense forest cover, the roaring rivers, the unpredictable weather patterns. It was a strategy born of desperation but honed by a lifetime spent in the wild, a lifetime of understanding its rhythms and secrets. This wasn't just about protecting Kodiak. It was about preserving a species, an entire unknown lineage, from the destructive curiosity of humanity. The next few days were a blur of meticulous preparation, each action weighed with grave importance. John gathered supplies, not for himself, but for the journey he hoped Kodiak and its family would undertake. Dried fruits, nuts, non-perishable rations, familiar scents to entice them, sustenance for their long trek. He packed an old canvas bag with items he typically brought on extended solo excursions, items that would later be used to create misleading scent trails. He moved with a quiet urgency, every rustle of leaves outside his cabin a reminder of the unseen eyes. He knew his movements were being scrutinized, every small deviation from his routine noted. He had to act naturally, yet purposefully, to avoid raising immediate alarm. One crisp morning, as the sun began to filter through the canopy, painting the forest floor in dappled light, John ventured out. He found Kodiak near their usual meeting spot, a clearing beside a trickling stream. The creature seemed to sense the shift in John's demeanor, standing taller, its massive shoulders hunched slightly, its deep-set eyes reflecting a profound, almost human understanding. John approached slowly, his heart heavy, his movements deliberate. He carried the canvas bag, its contents rattling softly. He placed the bag on the ground between them, then knelt. His voice, though a mere whisper, conveyed an urgency, a plea. He spoke in fragmented sentences, words not for Kodiak's comprehension, but for the emotion they carried. "You need to go," he murmured, his gaze locked with Kodiak's. "Farther, higher. They're coming. They know. You have to disappear." He used gestures, sweeping his arm towards the distant towering peaks, then pointing to the setting sun, implying endless escape. He then lifted a handful of the dried fruits from the bag, offering them in a gesture of sustenance and farewell. Kodiak watched him, its expression unreadable, yet filled with an ancient wisdom. It took the offering gently, its massive fingers surprisingly delicate. There was a moment of profound silence, a poignant, wordless exchange between man and creature, a bond forged in shared secrecy and impending danger. John placed his hand briefly on Kodiak's powerful forearm, a final, tangible connection, a silent promise. The creature then turned, its massive form dissolving into the shadows of the forest with an almost ethereal grace, its family following close behind, their shadowy shapes melting into the dense foliage. John watched until the last rustle of leaves faded, a deep ache settling in his chest. He knew this was likely the last time he would see them, a painful sacrifice for their freedom. The chase began almost immediately after Kodiak's departure. John returned to his cabin, but instead of settling in, he began his series of diversions. He started a small, controlled fire in an unusual spot far from his usual campfire ring, letting the smoke drift upwards, a beacon for aerial surveillance. He left a trail of his own scent, carefully placing discarded clothing and familiar items along a path, leading away from Kodiak's true direction towards a treacherous, impassable gorge. He moved with the precision of a seasoned hunter, turning over stones, snapping twigs in deliberate patterns, leaving subtle yet unmistakable signs of human passage. He heard the distant thrum of rotor blades, growing steadily louder. The FBI, observing his sudden flurry of activity, likely interpreted his actions as a desperate attempt to lead their target to safety, not as a calculated maneuver to send them on a wild goose chase. He knew they were expecting him to reunite with Kodiak, to guide it. This assumption was his greatest weapon. He led them away from the path Kodiak had taken, deeper into the rugged, unforgiving terrain he knew like the back of his hand. The air crackled with tension. He could almost feel their eyes on him, the unseen lenses of drones and satellites. Soon, he started to hear the crunch of boots on dry leaves, the muted voices of men closing in. He smiled grimly, a defiant glint in his eyes. They were taking the bait, the game was on, and John, the old ranger, was ready to play. The forest, once a sanctuary, was now his battlefield, and he intended to use every inch of it to protect his wild secret. The stakes were impossibly high, but for Kodiak, John would gamble everything. John melted into the deep shadows of the ancient forest, his movements fluid and silent, a stark contrast to the heavy-footed pursuit he engineered behind him. He guided the FBI agents on a high-stakes, adrenaline-fueled chase through a labyrinth of towering Douglas firs and gnarled hemlocks, every step a calculated deception. He was leading them not just through the woods, but through a meticulously crafted illusion. The crackle of their radios, muffled shouts, and the systematic crunch of their boots painted a vivid picture of their frustrated determination. He could almost taste their growing annoyance, their inability to grasp his unorthodox tactics. He was a ghost in his own backyard, an elusive target in a landscape he had intimately known for decades. Every fallen log, every hidden game trail, every treacherous patch of loose scree was a tool in his arsenal. He'd learned these woods not from maps or textbooks, but from years of silent observation, from living and breathing its every nuance. He knew where the ground gave way to bog, where rock faces became unclimbable, and where the narrowest ravines could be traversed with dangerous precision. He exploited every natural obstacle, every fleeting advantage the terrain offered. He scaled a steep, moss-covered embankment, his calloused hands finding purchase on roots and rough bark, his muscles burning but unwavering. At the summit, he paused, listening. The sounds of his pursuers were fainter now, lagging behind, struggling with the ascent he had made look effortless. He allowed himself a brief, grim smile. They were professionals, undoubtedly, but they were urban warriors thrust into a primal battlefield, a realm where John was sovereign. He knew they were expecting a straightforward chase, a clear path to follow. He gave them confusion, doubt, and physical exhaustion. He created false trails with cunning precision, dragging a broken branch behind him for a stretch to mimic a larger animal, then doubling back silently on his own footsteps through a shallow stream, washing away any trace. He left deliberately placed, yet ultimately misleading, markers. A snapped twig pointing in the wrong direction, a faint impression in the mud that suggested a heavier gait. He was playing a dangerous game of psychological warfare, chipping away at their confidence, sowing seeds of doubt about his actual whereabouts and intentions. He heard their increasing frustration, their voices growing sharper, tinged with a weariness that suited his purpose perfectly. The true climax of his desperate plan approached. He had led them towards a series of treacherous cliffs overlooking a roaring river, a natural choke point. This was where he would make his ultimate sacrifice, a diversion so compelling it would leave no doubt in their minds about his commitment, and more importantly, about their perceived prey's escape. He knew the risk was immense, potentially fatal, but the image of Kodiak and its family, vanishing into the untouched wilderness, kept him moving, fueled his resolve. Their freedom was paramount. As the sounds of the FBI team grew alarmingly close, their flashlights piercing the deepening twilight, John made his move. He deliberately exposed himself for a fleeting moment on the edge of a precipice, a silhouette against the last vestiges of daylight, just long enough for them to register his presence, to fixate on him. A shout went up from below, followed by the clatter of gear as they scrambled to pinpoint his location. He heard the metallic click of safeties being disengaged, the unmistakable tension in the air. Instead of retreating into the shadows, John did the unthinkable. He made a show of losing his footing, a convincing stumble that sent a cascade of loose rocks clattering down the cliff face. He then allowed himself to slide, not falling completely, but descending rapidly and noisily, down a steep, shale-covered gully, his body slamming against rocks, tearing through brush. He cried out, a raw, primal sound, simulating genuine panic and injury. He knew this would draw them in, make them believe they had him cornered, perhaps even incapacitated. The agents below reacted instantly, their focus now entirely on him. Flashlights converged on his position, shouts turning into urgent commands to secure the area. He heard them beginning their descent, their movements hurried and less cautious than before. They believed they had him, believed they had cornered the man who held the key to the elusive creature. This was precisely what he needed. Their full attention, their entire force now squarely on him. Through the pain and the adrenaline, John lifted his head, his eyes scanning the distant towering ridge he had directed Kodiak towards. He saw it then, a fleeting glimpse in the fading light, a massive, dark shape cresting the very edge of the ridge, followed by smaller ones. They were almost imperceptible, part of the landscape, but he knew what they were, Kodiak and its family. They were crossing. They were making it. They were disappearing. A profound wave of relief washed over him, a warm current through the cold fear. His mission was accomplished. They were safe, for now. They were beyond the reach of human technology, beyond the cold, grasping hands of those who would exploit or destroy them. He had done it. He had protected them. As the first agent, breathing heavily, reached his position, flashlight beam blinding him, John didn't resist. He lay there, bruised and battered, but a quiet, triumphant smile played on his lips. "You took the bait," he rasped, his voice hoarse, the satisfaction radiating from him despite his predicament. The agent, confused by his defiant calm, roughly pulled him to his feet. John allowed himself to be apprehended, his gaze still fixed on the distant ridge where the last sliver of Kodiak had just vanished. His secret was safe. The wilderness had swallowed them whole, just as he had planned. The game was over, and John, the old ranger, had won the most important battle of his life. John knew the moment they had him. The agents materialized from the dense undergrowth, silent and efficient, their faces grim, their weapons lowered but ready. He offered no resistance, simply raising his empty hands in a gesture of weary surrender. The pursuit had been relentless, a grueling ballet of hunter and hunted across miles of unforgiving wilderness. He had pushed his body to its absolute limits, driven by a singular purpose, to buy Kodiak and its kin enough time to truly vanish. As the cold steel of handcuffs clicked shut around his wrists, a wave of exhaustion washed over him. But beneath it, a profound sense of peace had taken root. He had seen them crest the distant ridge, tiny specks against the vast, indifferent sky, disappearing into the true wilderness, where even the most advanced surveillance would struggle to penetrate. His mission was accomplished. The interrogation room was stark and sterile, a jarring contrast to the vibrant, living forest he had just left. Agent Miller sat opposite him, dark eyes fixed on John, a mixture of frustration and grudging respect etched on his face. The questions came in a relentless barrage, polite yet firm, probing for any detail, any weakness, any crack in John's resolve. Where did they go? How many were there? What did they eat? How did you communicate? Each question was met with the same unwavering silence, or a deliberately vague, unhelpful response. John spoke of the vastness of the forest, the impossibility of tracking anything that didn't want to be found, the folly of trying to contain nature itself. He spoke of indigenous legends and the ancient, wild heart of the land, weaving a narrative that was just truthful enough to be believable, yet entirely devoid of the crucial details they sought. He described the creatures as elusive, almost mythical beings, a part of the wilderness spirit, never truly seen, only glimpsed at the edges of perception. Miller pressed him, citing the significant resources expended, the national security implications they had so gravely emphasized. John merely shrugged, a faint, almost imperceptible smile playing on his lips. National security, he mused, his voice raspy from days of exertion, seems a rather fragile thing if it can be threatened by creatures who simply wish to be left alone. The agents, despite their professional detachment, grew visibly frustrated. They had tracked him for days, had cornered him, yet the ultimate prize, the anomalous biological signatures, had slipped through their fingers. They played recordings of his and Kodiak's interactions, snippets of hushed vocalizations and the telltale thud of heavy footsteps. John listened, his heart aching with a bittersweet nostalgia. But he offered no further explanation. He simply confirmed that yes, he had encountered something extraordinary, something that defied easy categorization, and something that deserved its privacy above all else. He painted a picture of a species so perfectly adapted to its environment, so intrinsically linked to the forest, that any attempt to capture or study it would be an act of profound ignorance and destruction. He framed his actions not as defiance, but as a desperate attempt to protect a rapidly diminishing wonder. The consequences were inevitable. He lost his few remaining possessions. His cabin was meticulously scoured and eventually condemned, and he faced charges ranging from obstruction of justice to aiding and abetting an unidentified species. His story, when it eventually filtered out in a heavily redacted government report, was dismissed as the ravings of an eccentric recluse, a delusional former park ranger unable to cope with the solitude of the wild. Yet, in the quiet solitude of his cell, or, later, in the anonymous small town where he eventually settled, John found an unexpected solace. He had stood as a sentinel, a guardian for something ancient and pure, and he had succeeded. His sacrifice was a small price to pay for the freedom of a species that deserved to exist unmolested. He often thought of Kodiak, of the intelligent glint in its eyes, the gentle power of its touch. He imagined them, high in the remote peaks, thriving and living as they always had, a wild secret, kept by the vast, untamed heart of the continent. The world was still full of mysteries, he knew, and humanity, in its relentless quest to classify and control, often overlooked the profound beauty of the undiscovered. John had glimpsed one such beauty, had touched the edge of a different kind of existence, and it had forever changed him. He was no longer just an ex-park ranger. He was a silent testament to the enduring power of the wild, a keeper of a sacred trust. The FBI never found a trace of Kodiak or its family. The government eventually closed the file, deeming the threat neutralized, the sightings an anomaly, the reports unreliable, but John knew better. He carried the secret within him, a silent, burning ember of hope and wonder. Sometimes he would look at the distant mountain ranges, a faint smile on his lips, knowing that somewhere out there, hidden from the clamor of human civilization, a truly unique and innocent species continued its ancient dance with the earth. It was a bittersweet victory, tinged with personal loss, but victory nonetheless. The vastness of the natural world held countless wonders, and John had played his part in ensuring that at least one of them remained inviolable, a testament to the enduring mystery that still breathed within the wild places of this earth, a mystery that, perhaps, was best left undisturbed for eternity.